Hey church, welcome to a brand new feature called COVID Conversations. In the midst of all that we're walking through and all we're going through at the moment, we wanted to take opportunity on a weekly basis to be able to speak into your life in different areas about how you can not just survive through this crisis, but thrive. How you can be strengthened in different areas of your life, whether it's in your walk with God, whether it's in marriage, whether it's in mental health or parenting. And so we're going to take the opportunity to each week interview a guest, some from inside the country, some from around the world, who can help us think through and navigate all that we're facing at the moment. We really hope that this encourages you, that it helps to feed your faith and strengthens you in your walk with God and how you're facing everything that we're going through right now. Our very first week is going to be is Gail interviewing a great guest, a friend of ours called Ps Julie Keir. Enjoy that now, and we'll see you next week for another episode of COVID Conversations.
So welcome to COVID Conversations. We're so glad today to have one of my friends, Julie Keir. And Julie's going to help us kind of navigate some of this whole weird season, looking particularly at mental health. So Julie, do you want to introduce yourself and explain kind of what your role is in church, but also professionally what you do? Is that all right?
Sure. Well, great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm Julie Keir. I'm married to Stuart. I've got 3 adult children. I am one of the pastors at Audacious, and which is in Manchester. And my sort of key role in the life of the church at the moment is really looking to develop how we approach mental health and wellbeing as a church, and how we can resource other churches as well. And then my professional role is I'm a psychotherapist. So I work in a university counselling and mental health service, as well as having my own private practice.
Okay, so for those who don't understand, what is a psychotherapist compared to like a physiotherapist? Not physiotherapist, psychotherapist. All the different. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose if you contrast, a psychiatrist is generally the person that diagnoses and gives medication. So a big part of the psychiatrist's role is the medication side. A psychologist would generally describe themselves as a scientist, which I am not. I didn't have the brains to be a scientist. Whereas a psychotherapist, our training would be different. So a slightly different length of training. And my focus generally will be the delivery of treatment and therapy.
Great. So we're in this whole, mental health is such a massive thing anyway, but right now, possibly more than ever, in terms of everything's unstable, everything's changing. When you look on social media, one person saying, oh, it's going to be over in 3 days, another person saying it's 3 years. There's no absolutes anymore. So what do you think are some of the key things right now for everyone that we need to do to protect our mental health?
Well, I think, you've just said there that there's this massive level of uncertainty, and I think we've all begun to realise in this season that we love control. We like to think we have control normally, and I think what has happened is we've all probably realised that we have very little control of anything external to ourselves. We like to think perhaps we can control our children, or we can control our environment or our jobs, or but we actually have little control of anything outside of ourselves. So I think actually the key issues for us at the moment are recognizing that the only thing we can really control or try to control is ourselves, and our own responses and our behaviors, our actions and our attitudes. And I think during lockdown and this time of the coronavirus, it's a great time perhaps to start to begin to think, okay, how can I better control my own emotions, thoughts, responses? Yeah.
So when we're kind of bombarded with stuff, and some things it's healthy to watch. I shared with church a while ago, I deleted my news apps and just thought, because I'm constantly seeing it all the time, it's not particularly helping me. I realized the first week I was really kind of up and down all over the place, and just thought I need to, like you said, kind of control what I feed myself a little bit. What other practical things can we do to kind of help protect ourselves mentally in this time, do you think?
I mean, you've just mentioned one there with the news. I think, in making sure that we only take in what we need to take in. And I think at the moment, my perspective is, well, when something changes, we're going to hear about it. So I generally am not really watching a lot of news, because I think, well, I'm soon going to hear about it if something changes. So I think limiting our access to things that could be anxiety provoking. And essentially fear is something we can feed or we can starve. And we can feed our fear by watching too much news or having lots of conversations about, well, when's this going to change, when is it going to be any different, or we can feed it by things like what if thoughts, well, what if this happens and what if that happens. So I think that a good question is, am I feeding my fear by the things I'm doing, or am I aiming to sort of starve that fear by reducing the things that can make it worse?
That's really good, yeah, because I think that's really key, isn't it? That we have some control on ourselves, and yeah, control for me, I mean, I've chatted to you lots of times, is a thing, and so to realise that we don't have it, it is quite scary. And I think, and it is changing all the time, and so fear is so prevalent. And I think we like to think as Christians, obviously, we don't have fear, we don't have anxiety, but the reality is we do. And I think sometimes the church has not been great at recognising those things. So I've heard people say, well, as a Christian you can't have anxiety. I mean, what do you say about that sort of thing? Because what we don't want to do is perpetuate that idea, but also the thought of kind of just this falseness of just I'm fine, I'm absolutely fine because I'm a Christian and Jesus is enough, which he is, but also fear is real.
Sure, absolutely. And we know as Christians, the Bible says, Philippians, do not be anxious about anything. So we know in many ways God commands us not to be afraid and not to be anxious. I think it sounds like what you're saying is we've got to find a balance there, between denying perhaps what we're actually experiencing and dwelling in fear. And I think God's created our bodies in such a way as we automatically respond to things that our brain perceives as a threat. So if we perceive something as a threat, so maybe we're thinking, well, what if one of my family members gets sick, or what if I lose my job, we will automatically begin to feel symptoms of anxiety. Maybe our heart will beat faster, maybe we'll feel a bit more tense or anxious. But I think the key things is to be able to notice. So we almost begin to act as an observer of our own emotions and experiences. So rather than being sort of freaked out or panicked by our anxious response, it's about noticing it and saying, oh, okay, I'm noticing that I'm feeling a little bit worried, or my body's telling me I'm a bit anxious. So I'm going to notice that, but then I'm going to say, well, actually, it's probably understandable that I would feel a little bit anxious at the moment. So I'm not going to freak out about those symptoms, which could then bring on something like a panic attack if you start to focus on them and make more of them than you need to. But there's something about just noticing, acknowledging, maybe then just saying to God, I'm noticing I'm feeling anxious today, but you know what, I'm going to hand that over to you, and do what Philippians 4 says, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests and concerns to God. And then we'll get his peace.
That's really great. And I think that's one of the key things, that we're not presenting this falseness about as Christians. Nothing affects us. We're absolutely fine. And then having it just underlying all the time. One of the things that a few leaders messaged me about, because I put this out to Connect leaders and said, have you got any questions? A few people said, look, we're struggling with sleep. What would you say is some really key, just really, sometimes we need to go back to basics. What are some basic things to help us sleep in this time? Because I think a lot of people are kind of managing their thoughts during the day, but then as sleep happens or it's not happening, that's one kind of thing that we've got to overdrive. So any tips for sleep?
Yeah, the first thing I suppose is to keep your normal routine. So, don't be tempted to think, I can go to bed later, or I can sleep in longer. But the best thing to do is to go to bed at roughly the same time every night, and to set your alarm for the same time every morning. So you are almost conditioning yourself to, this is bedtime, this is get up time. What's also really helpful is consider what you're doing immediately before you go to bed. So, if you're on social media or looking at the news before you go to sleep, you're perhaps more likely to struggle to go to sleep, or have nightmares or wake up in the night. So look at what you're feeding yourself just before you go to bed. Obviously think about things like caffeine. Are you drinking more caffeine because you're at home? That could be impacting your sleep. And the other things that can be helpful are things like, if you do wake up in the night, don't get up and go downstairs and have a cup of tea or coffee, because that's more caffeine. But consider even having a little notebook by your bed, and if you do wake up with worries on your mind, just say, okay, I'm going to deposit my worries onto this notebook, open it up, write them down, shut the book, say, God, I'm giving these worries to you, put the book back and go back to bed. So trying to manage the worries. And also you might decide in the night, actually that worry is something I could do something about tomorrow. So write an action point next to it and then close the book. So you're actually doing something about what you're worrying about in the night. And also it is, I know you mentioned about thoughts in the day. Often if we've been dwelling on anxious thoughts in the day, or avoiding the thoughts in the day, sometimes it's like that snow globe effect. When you get in bed, it's like the snow globe settles, and you're suddenly aware of all the things that perhaps you haven't thought about during the day, that maybe were worries or fears, and they kind of hit you when you settle at night. So what you might want to do is maybe an hour and a half before bedtime, you might sit with your journal and say, is there anything that's kind of left with me today that I want to give to God, anything I want to note down, so that it doesn't happen when you get in bed.
Oh, that's great. That's really good advice. Thanks, Julie. One of the things that people have obviously in this season, suddenly the change is homeschooling. And kids. Now you've got older kids. The youngest just left college unexpectedly.
Sure.
As thousands of teenagers did. So they're a little bit older, but obviously you've had younger kids. You never perhaps had to homeschool in this sudden panicked new way. A lot of parents are struggling with their own kids' kind of anxieties and stuff. There's not the answers that they're looking for. There's this uncertainty. Any wisdom as a mum and as a professional to how we can help calm our kids' anxieties as well at the moment, or thoughts?
Yeah, and I think it's understandable that our kids are going to feel shaken or thrown, or maybe that we're going to see stuff coming out in their behaviour that wouldn't perhaps be completely normal for that child. As adults, we often struggle to put our feelings and emotions into words. So how much more our kids? That they've suddenly been thrown into this unusual situation as we have. So it's expected in a way that they may behave or act in ways that aren't normal for them. So in a way, if we're expecting that, not that we're expecting difficulty, but if we recognise, okay, they may not be quite their normal self, I think that's a good starting point. I think next it's about allowing your child to actually express how they're feeling. So giving them opportunity maybe to talk about, what's worrying them, what's concerning them, what feels different. And that could be through talking, or it could be through, even while you're sat playing with your child, maybe on the PlayStation or in the garden, you might just say, oh, how you doing? How are you feeling about this? And give them an opportunity to talk about their feelings. Or even if it's a child that's like quite an active child, maybe ramping up or increasing more activities where they can let off a bit of steam, making sure that you build those into the day so that they're not just cooped up, so that you're allowing them to get rid of some of that excess kind of energy.
I can vouch for
yeah.
Yeah. So we are going back to basics with Asha. I bet you can't run this fast. I can.
Yeah.
We're going back to the toddler.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's making it fun, so we've always found with our kids, that particularly if we can observe they're perhaps going through something difficult, that sometimes rather than that head-on approach of, for goodness sake, what's wrong with you, or why are you behaving like this, it's I'm having a conversation on the journey or whilst doing something else. So rather a side-by-side conversation than a confrontational conversation. Right. So obviously that might look a bit different in lockdown, but you know, we have a dog and we might take the dog for a walk with that child, and while you're walking along, you know what, it reminds me of that scripture in Deuteronomy, you know, talk to your kids about these things as you go on the way, you know. So it's more about the side-to-side conversation can be more powerful than that face-to-face, you know, confrontational, what on earth's wrong with you, why are you behaving, you know, it's just not always helpful.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I think we're in this bizarre, unique situation of the pressure from everything, the pressure from even with different schools, that we're seeing that with, you know, with 4 campuses of church, different school authorities. Some school are kind of setting, oh, you know, you can learn through play. Other schools are piling on pressure to, you know, even with year 1 kids, that parents are like, I cannot teach adverbials and all this sort of stuff that we didn't learn off. We did, it was 30 years ago. So I mean, do you have any sort of wisdom into that, to kind of manage an expectation and feeling like, I guess one of the things that's come up a few times is feeling like I'm failing as a parent in this season, and that whole comparison and all that sort of stuff, which just kills us. And at the moment I feel like it's really building.
Yeah, and I think, you know, anything, any sort of any way of thinking about ourselves which involves, you know, a comparison to another parent, or beating ourselves up about how well we're doing or not doing, or feeling guilty, these things, I often use the expression, it takes us out of the game, because we spend more time caught up in our own worries and thoughts about, oh, you know, I'm not good enough, or what if this, or what if that. And it actually reduces our effectiveness as parents. So rather than helping us be a better parent, when you're criticizing and beating yourself up, it actually it immobilizes you as a parent. So I think there's something again about noticing. So, you know, notice that you're having those thoughts as a parent. Notice if you're feeling guilty or if you're comparing yourself. And again, you know, I feel like I do often say, I say this a lot, but actually write it down. So, you know, find a way of noting down, this is the thought I'm having, this is the worry I'm having, this is the fear I'm having, and put it into words, because there's something about getting it out of your head onto paper, and then actually asking yourself, you know, is this true? Is what I'm thinking about myself or saying about myself 100% true, or is there another way of looking at this? You know, what would somebody I respect say to me if I told them I was thinking this? What does the Word of God say about this? And so challenging that way of thinking about yourself and asking yourself, is this helpful? Is this going to help me be a better parent to think like this?
Absolutely. And for me, the first week was pretty intense, that Noah suddenly had 14 subjects that I was supposed to teach while I was working. And so I did a really practical thing. I just emailed school and said, this is not going to work. And they were really good and said, okay, what will work? So we've negotiated a different timetable. And I think I've said that to a few parents that have kind of said to me, I don't know how to do this. And just from my experience, certainly with our kids, talking to the teachers helps. I think sometimes the expectation is imagined. It's not that we're expecting that they're supposed to go at the same level that they were or further on. And my understanding so far is actually most teachers don't expect that if we just communicate with the school and, you know, say how we're feeling, because, you know, we have enough stuff going on that we can't control. The schooling thing, we can have a little bit of control.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something about just being able to be kind to yourself, really, and say, okay, I'm going to do my best, but this is an incredibly unusual situation, and many of us aren't teachers. We don't have those skills, and you know, it's a very difficult situation. So being kind and doing what you can, really, I think is probably the best.
Amazing. And that's great advice anyway, just being kind for yourself. What sort of things could that look like, aside from schooling and stuff? What sort of practical things in this season can we do that gives ourselves a bit of a break?
I think the first thing is having a break from the children. I know some parents I've talked to have just found it so hard being kind of cooped up all the time. So I think if there is a possibility for you to have your daily exercise on your own, I know some families initially they were all going out together for the exercise, but it might be better for your own mental health and well-being to have that time on your own. So if it's getting out of the house, obviously if you're a single parent, that could be more challenging. That could be about creating that time for yourself. Maybe when the kids are having a break, in their school timetable, having a little break, you have a break. Don't think I'll use that time to do some jobs. Use the time for yourself. Put your feet up, make yourself a brew, read a bit of a novel, or listen to some music. So I think creating time and space for yourself is a way you can be kind, and recognizing you're allowed time off as well, from being a parent. So I think it is about sometimes carving that time out. And it won't happen on its own. So we have to be intentional as parents about finding that time to refresh, to replenish. And even in your own home, there's things that we can do, whether it's a nice bath and you light your candles, or, a nice shower, or, even painting your nails as a woman, or, the men, if you want to paint your nails, that's fine.
I want to see you, so it's okay.
Yeah, but whatever that is for you, that's going to help you just to feel a bit calmer, and just invest something in yourself in this time is important.
That's great. That's really good advice. I think one of the things that is a little bit that we're seeing in church right now is we have quite a lot of people that work in the NHS at the moment, or a military, and a lot of medics who are suddenly thrown in right on the front line with paramedics in church, who are seeing things and dealing with stuff that the rest of us are seeing on the news, but that's as far as close as we're getting to it. And one of the things Ben and I speak to a few of them sometimes on the phone, and one of the struggles they're having, I guess, is the balance between faith and also the reality of what we're seeing, and how we don't want to be faithless, but we also don't want to be reckless. And how do we manage that? Because that's quite a tension, isn't it, as Christians, that we have to kind of navigate. We don't want to be fearful, but we don't want to be just crazy either as well. Any thoughts on that sort of thing?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think there's something about the balance and the tension there of being in faith, but also taking precautions where we need to. So, I said, for the people that are working out there on the front line, they really are putting themselves in a more risky place. We know that, and I suppose it's again something about not falling into fear, because there could be a tendency or a danger of just becoming so fearful of what if I get COVID-19, what if I get ill. And so there's something about being able to find a place where you can rest in the promises of God, rest in what God is saying to you as an individual, but at the same time, when you are going out into the workplace, making sure that you are protecting yourself as much as possible. We know that there's a lot of challenges around the PPE at the moment and things like that. And so I think it's trying to manage the fear and the faith, and the practicalities and the faith as well.
And any advice? I guess one of the hardest things must be the journey home, I think, because we don't have hospital in Richmond, or actually in any of our campuses. So everyone that's working has a good half an hour, 40-minute journey home. And I think to process that and what they've seen and what they've just left, and then to walk, many of them are parents, they walk from that into mummy or daddy mode again. And so that's any thoughts that, you obviously not quite the same field, but also you manage people's emotions and all that sort of stuff. How do you really decompress well on that journey? I
suppose one thing I've learned for myself is, particularly in the university setting, we deal with a lot of risks around suicide, and we do have to face some really challenging situations. And something I began to do a little while ago is I'd finish my work day, so I'd close my computer off, I'd pack everything away, and normally at that point that's when you go home. But I started a habit of getting everything ready to go home, then I would make myself a cup of tea, and I would sit in my chair, and I would do a bit of a mental download of, okay, what have I taken on today, what's still hanging around. And I would either write it down, or I would just maybe pray about it and say, God, I want to give you all these things, like handing them all over before I then leave the office for the day and travel home. Now, obviously, in a hospital setting, that might be look a little bit different, but even the potential when you get into your car before you start driving home, you could actually just take a moment to sit there and either get a notebook out or even record something on your phone, you know, or just pray and say, okay, these are the things I'm going to leave behind. You know, this is what I've seen that's been upsetting, this is what I've heard, but I want to leave it here. And that's the way that I found to do it. So it's almost like you're just handing it over, and then you're walking away and saying, that's today, I'm going home now, and tomorrow I'll start again.
That's really great advice. That's brilliant. Amazing. Just one more quick thing before we finish, because I don't want to take up your whole day. Just the last thing is marriage. So we're actually doing another COVID conversation next week about marriage. So we don't have to talk about it for too long, but just practically that seems to be quite a pressure. There's the parenting thing and then the marriage. For Ben and I, a bit like you and Stuart, really, we're often together. I mean, Ben and I work together, live together, parent together. So it's not really any different. But for many people, they have never spent so much time together, and the pressure's building, and the expectation, all this sort of stuff is kind of up there, and there's no escape.
No, absolutely.
Any kind of words of wisdom and how we do this well?
Yeah, I mean, it's another great question, and I heard someone say the other day that, you know, for some couples this is the most time they've spent together since their honeymoon, which in a way I think that sounds a bit sad, but probably true for some people. I mean, I suppose I'll talk from my personal perspective of what I've noticed, because, you know, that's probably my best example, is my own example. Is I found the first couple of weeks, it was almost like you're suddenly in this like greenhouse where, you know, it's hot, it's all the pressures are kind of coming in, and I think you almost can see the worst in each other at those times. You know, so I found myself, I know it's really hard to imagine that my husband has any faults if you know him, but I found myself, all I could notice were the things that were irritating, you know, the things he was saying or doing that I was finding irritating. And about 2 weeks in, I thought, hang on a minute, I've got to stop doing this, you know, because not only was I noticing them myself, but I was pointing them out, you know, why did you do that, and why did you do that, and so that you could feel the pressure beginning to build, really. So what I did, not surprisingly, is in my devotional time, just sat down and with God and said, you know what, I've noticed what I'm doing, you know, and this isn't really helping. So rather than, again, trying to control your partner, it's got to be about, what can I do to change myself and control myself better? So I began to just notice if I was tempted to say something that was going to be unhelpful, or actually downright kind of, you know, a little bit critical. I was just noticing that more and choosing what to say and not to say. And I think that's a massive thing, is choose what you allow to come out of your mouth and what you choose to keep to yourself. And I began to, my first thing was to notice what I was doing, which wasn't very nice. Then I sat down and I wrote a list of everything about my husband that I was thankful for and grateful for. And so I just sat and wrote down everything, you know, from the smallest things to the biggest things, that, you know, what I appreciated about him. And it was quite a powerful experience in a way, because I went from being critical to being thankful. And I think that's when I began to see things change, you know, and this was all in myself. I don't think I've even mentioned this to Stuart, but I began to, you know, things began to change as I began to notice instead what I was grateful for about him, and you know, began to control what was coming out of my mouth.
That's great, and that's good, of course, with everything. Even with your kids, I guess you could do the same.
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
With everything, really, and just life in general. We're doing that with Noah quite a lot, of just, you know, okay, when he's worried, what 3 things are you thankful for? That changes the atmosphere. Changes
your focus, and then the atmosphere,
One of the things that you taught us a few years ago when you did marriage course in our church, which some of us went to, and we always go back to, is to explain expectations sometimes, because a lot of the issues that build are because we aren't married to mind readers. So we, you know, even if I'm out for the day, so I was working on Monday, I was out all day, Ben was at home. So we didn't quite start the day, but before I left, we just said, okay, my expectations this time are that you would do some washing and do some English work with Noah. And then so was released to, okay, so when I'm not doing stuff, I can chill out and I can have a day off. But I'm not going to come home to a wife that's disappointed. And he was released, I was released because I think, okay, I don't have to do washing in English when I get home. And I think it's just great advice that we use a lot of, I mean, rather than me being frustrated that Ben's not mind reading, that's often a thing. And I think that's when we're working with people at the moment who are kind of suddenly thrown into this whole new way of doing marriage. That's the thing I keep going back to. You need to explain these things and communicate. And just being together all the time doesn't mean you're communicating more.
No, it really doesn't. So it sounds like such a helpful thing to do, to sort of ask each other about your expectations of each day and of each other as well.
Well, you told us that, so.
Well, there we go. What can we say?
Amazing. Any last thoughts, Julie, before we finish, that you think are really key that we know? I mean, we could go on for hours. We could talk about isolation and all these other things as well. But anything key that you think we haven't covered that would be helpful for people to know in this season?
I suppose the only thing we haven't talked about is loss, which is obviously a massive thing at the moment for people. We've obviously, I would say it'd be hard to find anyone at the moment who isn't experiencing loss in some way. You know, it could be loss of a job, it could be loss, you know, for our kids who haven't been able to do exams, that's a loss. Loss of income, and then obviously a loss of a life. So people who've actually lost a loved one. And I think one of the key things that I suppose I'd want to say is that to actually experience a loss in lockdown, a bereavement, when you haven't necessarily got people around you, I think we have to be a lot more intentional, both as the person supporting and as the person who's experienced the loss. I think one of the key things is to make sure that we are, you know, reaching out to people that have had losses, and whether that's, you know, by phone, whether it's by video calls, and allowing people to talk about what's happened. I think, you know, trying to support someone without being able to give them a hug is really hard, particularly if someone's living on their own. But I think one of the key things that I've learned in my work and in my own experience is that when someone's experienced a loss, what we often do is we test people out with what we feel we can share with them. And I often call it the difference between the Disney rated version and the 18 rated version. So, you know, we're feeling strong emotions, we're hurt, we're upset, we're grieving, and we test people out with, well, I'll give them the Disney version and see if they can cope with that, or if they'll stay with me. And then maybe we'll test a bit more and give them the 12 version. But I think we need to try and be the sort of people that people can give the 18 rated version to. You know, this is painful, this is hard, this is difficult. They may be feeling angry, they might want to shout. But how amazing if we could be that person that could receive the 18 rated version and say, do you know what, this is okay, you know, and allow people to talk. And also to be able to share, so if we're the person that's struggling, being able to have someone in our lives that we can trust enough to say, this is how it is. Will you just walk through this with me at this time? So I think we need to be aware that people are hurting. Be someone people can listen to. Absolutely.
And I think we've talked many times about, okay, we're isolated physically but not emotionally, and so and until you go through a loss, sometimes you don't realize the need for that sort of thing. And so, you know, rather than waiting until we're at a crisis point and then thinking, oh, I need to get plugged into a connect group, I need to know people who are in my church, I think it's important to build those foundations now. Make sure that you are connecting fully. For some people, they have loads of time. So we've just set up book groups. One of the books is Stay that we're doing.
Amazing.
And to really help kind of ground ourselves. Some people, they're more busy than ever before. Their whole they're managing work. We've got police and nurses and counsellors and teachers even that are in church who are suddenly working and managing home in a different way. So there's all this kind of different stuff going on, but I think the key thing, really, like you said, is we've got to stay connected. We've got to
absolutely
have to happen right now. There is a way to not be isolated, although physically we can't be together. And obviously, in all of it, Jesus is there, and I think when we feel like we haven't got anyone else we can go to, he understands. And that's one of the amazing things about the gospel, is it explains Jesus lived it and went through rejection and loss and all things, so he gets it. Thank you so much, Julie. We really appreciate your time. I'm sure it's been really helpful, and if you found this helpful, then make sure you comment and let us know, and I'll send all the comments to Julie, because it's just so key. And I think we have to talk about it. We can't just pretend this is not a thing, everything's fine. It's a thing we're walking through. But we have a choice in how we walk through it, whether we do it on our own or with the people, whether we walk through it and just pretend, or whether we're real about things, and if we walk with God, or we try and just deal with it on our own. So thank you so much for your wisdom. Massively appreciate it. Thank you.
I've loved being with you. Thanks so much.